Welcome and welcome to this special event on behalf of OxLEP, the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership at the Oxford Brookes University Creative Industries Festival 2021. If you were with us earlier in the month for our first contribution to this festival, you'll be aware that OxLEP, who champion Oxfordshire's businesses and organisations to drive a dynamic, sustainable and growing economy, teamed up with Oxford Brookes back in 2019 to help establish the Oxfordshire Creative Industries Showcase. We're delighted to say that this relationship continues to blossom and give our heartfelt congratulations to the Oxford Brookes team who've produced this fascinating festival with more great content still to come before the end of the month. The creative sector is big business. Pre-COVID, the UK's creative industries contributed over £100 billion a year to the economy. Locally in Oxfordshire, we're home to almost 4,000 digital and creative businesses alone. They're a significant and dynamic force within the industry and a crucial part of the area's economic landscape. In 2021, our creative industries face a series of urgent challenges, not least the rebuilding of businesses post-pandemic, the effects of Brexit on the sector, and the focus of our conversation today, how can some of the most talented and creative individuals from diverse communities find their way into the industry? In this session, we'll ask the question, what is a creative and diverse county? Many would argue that Oxford and Oxfordshire's creative industries are hidden from many of our hardest to reach communities. We'll explore this point shortly. The irony is that these are often the communities with the talent, entrepreneurship, and most creative minds to be really successful. A part of the problem may well be that many of these communities perhaps don't know how to connect with the Oxfordshire business landscape to progress their creativity to the next level or even commercialise their ideas. Before I introduce our panel, we'd really like to hear from you during this presentation. We want to make the event as interactive as possible and invite you to put your questions into the chat facility. We'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the broadcast and we'll endeavour to answer as many of your questions as we can. If there are issues that require a little more detail, then do rest assured one of the OxLEP team will be back in touch to follow this up. And if you're watching this as a recording, you can always get in touch via the website oxfordshirelep.com. So let's meet our panel today, and we're delighted to have with us Lucinda Whiteley. Lucinda is Creative Director at Novel Entertainment, known for creating successful children character brands such as Horrid Henry, among many others. Her career spans television, theatre, film and publishing, previously working at Universal Pictures and at Channel 4. She's been a Vice Chair of the World Summit on Children's Television, a board member of BAFTA, a founding member of Children's BAFTA. She's on the board of the Oxford Technology and Media Network, OxLEP's Culture and Visitor Economy subgroup, and is a judge at the Rose Door. Lucy Shaw is Director at Cultural Associates Oxford, a management consultancy thinking for the cultural and creative sectors. She also heads up Oxford University Gardens, Libraries and Museums, or GLAM, Community Engagement, Volunteering and Partnerships teams, delivering innovative programmes which foster inclusive working practices. She's also a successful fundraiser, raising over £11 million and building GLAM's national portfolio organisation relationship with Arts Council England. Tasha Patel is the newly appointed Creative Industries Officer at the University of Oxford. Her role is to connect arts and humanities researchers with the creative industries to foster mutually beneficial partnerships. We'll find out more shortly. Tasha has a background in production and has freelanced for both ITV and BBC, having previously worked in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Delighted to have with us Andy Edwards, who has a master's from Oxford Brookes in Architecture and Sustainable Buildings and is co-director at Make Space Oxford, whose aim is to see thriving community, creativity and innovation in Oxfordshire's once empty and underused spaces. He's also the co-founder of the architectural cooperative Transition by Design, helping communities and organisations transition to a low-carbon society. We have Jasmine Richards, who's a children's author and screenwriter. Her most recent novel, Keeper of Myths, was published by HarperCollins US. Jasmine is a successful screenwriter too and worked on Series 5 of PJ Masks. She's also the founder of StoryMix, who creates stories with inclusive themes at their heart. One of the key goals at StoryMix is to champion writers from underrepresented backgrounds. Richard Durier is here. He's Shadowlight Artists Project Manager at Film Oxford, the regional hub for film and digital media, supporting a community of filmmakers and digital creators. Richard also runs the Shadowlight Artist Group, which are an award-winning group of adult artists with learning disabilities. The group's focus being to find the most talented artists with learning disabilities in the area and develop their skills on an equal basis to professional artists. And last but certainly not least, Natasha Guerra. Natasha is CEO of Runway East, an organisation creating co-working spaces for high-growth startups, or as they neatly put it on their website, happy homes for ambitious businesses. In fact, I should sign up their scriptwriter, as they unashamedly and rather catchily say online, in 6 years, we've watched our companies raise over £500 million. We're here to make good work with good people, and we're here to enjoy the ride. Love it. So a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. It's like the school register this afternoon here. Each of you, if I can get a word from you on this first point, and Lucinda, perhaps you would give us the first answer. I mentioned in the introduction that Oxford and Oxfordshire's creative industries are hidden from many of our hardest to reach communities. Is that your view? And share some experience of it.
Thank you, Howard, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this group. I feel it's a really good place to start this conversation, or to continue this conversation. So I think what you're asking is, are we, the creative industries, hidden from the communities? And I think that's an interesting question. I think you'd probably need to go and ask the various communities, but I would certainly say I don't think that they are hidden from us. I think you have to go and look. I think we have to open our eyes and make connections. And that's why I mean, I have to say we were somewhat surprised to realise that we were designated a creative industry, because 25 years ago when we set the company up, the idea of a creative industry, I don't think existed even in the government's mind. When the DCMS decided that there was a huge grouping of creative and artistic endeavours which would come under that umbrella, I think it's almost like trying to catch jelly in your hands, because there are so many different ways of defining creatives and creative communities. And I think one of the most important things is to be available and accessible, and to be open to conversation. I think that's a fantastically good starting point. I think I would hope that we all are, but I'm interested to hear what other people's views are.
Tasha, share your view.
Sure, I agree with Lucinda. I really hope that we are open to various communities within Oxford. And I think there are so many programs and things like what Richard's doing with Shadowlight, also Creative Access, that really engage local communities and underrepresented groups to get involved with the creative industries, which I think is an excellent starting point. And as Lucinda said, starting the conversation and having that conversation and making sure we as creative industries are open and accessible to these communities is a really important starting point.
Andy?
Yeah, I think great point. And yeah, I think it's just the challenge is to start to break down this quite challenging and monolithic question to move beyond being sort of, are we hidden? Are we visible? I think, it's quite easy for us to see one another, but not necessarily be able to meet one another where we're at. And the questions around not just are we hidden, but are we relevant? Are we actually connecting with what people in different and more diverse communities resonate with as being creative? Everyone as an individual, I'm a big believer as a designer. We're all designers. Everyone is a designer. We're all creative. We're all problem solvers. But is the kind of the institution and the industries that are sort of most synonymous with creativity, are they relevant to people in more diverse communities? And are there clear pathways in which people can meet with us, really?
That coming together, give us some experience from your side of things, Natasha.
Yeah, so I mean, I only really know about kind of the more IT sector within the kind of creative industries, and we're kind of early in our journey to Oxford, kind of planning to come over the next year. So don't know too much about Oxford as a whole, but generally I think that there is definitely a problem within the IT industry, that they're not very visible to like diverse backgrounds and people from. And I do think that's one of the main challenges with that is often around funding and access to funding, and how people can reach out to that if they're not already tied into the networks.
As obviously from the introduction, you really do come at things from very much different angles within the creative industries. Lucy, share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that our cultural and creative industries are doing a lot to be more welcoming and inclusive. And actually, I would question the use of hidden and visible, and perhaps use terms like exclusive or excluding and inclusive. because we do want to be more accessible, obviously, but I don't think that we are. And I don't think we can put our hands on our hearts and say that equity and diversity and inclusion, it thoroughly exists across the creative and cultural sectors. I think we've still got loads to do, and that doesn't mean there isn't brilliant work going on, because there's some fantastic pockets of work, but this shouldn't be stuff that happens on the side. It should be part of our core business and the work that we do every day.
Richard, share your thoughts, sir.
Sorry, I'd agree with Lucy there. I think, yeah, inclusivity is a better word there, because talking particularly about people with learning disabilities, they're often very sort of hard to reach communities. They're very sort of marginalised, and this is in order for organisations, academic institutions, and companies to sort of engage with them, they have to change the way they go about things, particularly, and make them more accessible. And it's a quite a complex and quite a time-consuming sort of thing to do, but it's really worthwhile when you do it. Jasmine, share your thoughts, if you would.
I think a lovely segue, actually, Richard. I think I much prefer the word inclusion rather than diversity. But I think actually what we need to eyeball and understand is that the needs of all these different groups they can't necessarily all be lumped together. You know, if we're trying to be inclusive, what that means for people with learning disabilities versus people from lower socioeconomic groups, and how difficult it is to make a living in the creative industries if you don't have a safety blanket, versus people from minority ethnic groups and what it feels like to be the only one in the room. All of these things are different, you know, and they sit alongside each other, but they're not necessarily the same challenges. So when we lump everything in underneath these banners of diversity and inclusion, I think we lose some of without the nuance, we lose the opportunity to actually make impact.
So just staying with you, Jasmine, and Lucy, because you made a very, very good point in your answer. What is holding these communities back? And I use the term these communities because, as you've just said, Jasmine, it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all type of answer, is it?
Is that for Lucy or myself, Howard?
For you, Jasmine, first.
Oh, for me. Yeah, exactly. It's really difficult to say as a catch-all what is holding people back. I mean, I can only sort of speak about my own lived experience. So coming from a working class background and being from a minority ethnic group and being a children's author and script writer, I'm very often like the only one in the room. Now, I studied at Oxford University, and so I'm quite used to that. And obviously things are changing in Oxford, and there's great leaps and strides, but actually going to Oxford was great training for them to work at an institution like Penguin or at the BBC. So there's something about, I think, being aware that it's tough coming into these industries where you are the only one. And as welcoming as you are, I think it's really important to understand those challenges and to support, because certainly what happens in publishing is there's lots of work happening to bring people in, but they don't stay and they don't get to the top of the ladder. And actually it's at the top of the ladder where real change is going to happen, when you're making the acquiring decisions, be it books or TV. If people aren't getting to the top, things aren't going to change. So I think you've got to understand that's a difficult space. What are we doing as companies to support that?
Lucy, your thoughts on what's holding?
No, I mean, I think Jasmine's she's nailed that response. It's not about people being held back. It's about our organisational cultures being excluding and not enabling people to stay once they've come into our organisations. So actually, what's wrong with us? That's the question that we should be asking. It's not what's holding people back. It's what do we need to do to change, actually, to be really inclusive organisations that welcome everyone to work there. And, you know, we know from our work within the University of Oxford, I'm thinking about the museums in particular here, and the work that we've done, for example, with refugee and forced migrant communities through Multaka Oxford, that it's not about, you know, us being the expert on the platform and letting people come in and work with our collections. It's actually about people coming in and telling us what they know about our collections, and us being able to recognise their expertise, which actually far exceeds our own. So it's sort of flipping it round.
No, that's really interesting. And Tasha, I want to focus on your new role just for a moment, if you would, because you now connect arts and humanities researchers with the creative industries. How have you found that task in the short while that you've been in post?
Sure. I mean, let me start off by saying I really do appreciate the university's investment in a role like mine, and understanding the need to connect researchers within the university with the creative industry. So I think it's a great role to be in, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. In the first 3 months, again, because everything's remote, really my role is relationship building and getting a sense of internally what our researchers and academics are interested in, what they're working on, and getting a sense of their level of interest with working externally with creative industries, but also doing the same externally, connecting in with companies local to Oxford, across the UK, internationally, and getting a sense of how they want to work with our researchers and academics, and finding a way to sort of bridge the gap based on overlapping interests. So, I mean, of course, that with everything being remote, that has been a little bit challenging, but you'd be surprised how interested on both sides, I feel like, the creative industries and internally researchers are engaging with the creative industries and finding ways to do, as you mentioned, mutually beneficial collaborations between the two, and also engage local communities and underrepresented groups seems to be a big focus as well.
Let's concentrate on what the issues are for now, and then we'll move on to solutions in the latter part of the discussion. So Lucinda, Andy and Richard, if I can look towards you for a response to this next point. So what's the root of the problem here? Is it the education system? I mean, it just simply isn't a level playing field right from a very young age, is it? Lucinda, perhaps you'd give us your thoughts first.
Gosh, I think if we can answer that by the end of this session,
there's a lot to do in an hour.
We'll be far more creative than any of us think that we are. Gosh, where is it? For me, and in terms of the areas that I work in, the conversations that I have, I think it's everything, all of the above, and many, many more things. I think just going back to this conversation that we've just had in this discussion, it's also really about asking questions and listening properly to the answers and enabling that conversation to be a proper conversation, and then to act collaboratively, because I don't think we have all the answers. So I don't think you can assume that if you are a decision maker or a leader or an industry leader, or you have a successful industry, that the creative industry and creative company as part of the creative industries, that you are necessarily going to have all of the answers. And some creators don't want to be massively successful in the, by industrial standards. They may have different criteria for success and for what they want to do with their creativity, or how they want to interact with people. Do they want to be big, small, whatever? So I think it's really a process that takes an enormous amount of time and patience on everybody's side. And you also have to ask yourself who's not part of that discussion as well, who's not coming to these spaces. If we can create spaces for that conversation, who's not there? Who are the decision makers that are not there that could really make a difference? And then it's a question of lobbying them as well, because we're talking about progress and process. Really, change is a different thing, I think, because we're never going to get to the end of this.
No, quite. And you raised some very interesting philosophical points. Andy, part of what you do is about spaces. Has Lucinda touched on a part of the issue there?
Yeah, absolutely. So many good points there. And it is really about looking to not just decision making, although that's key, but where the power lies. And there is this nexus around space that links to power. So we often find ourselves asking, who has access to this space? What does a safe space look and feel like to different communities? And how can we work towards actually making spaces feel more accessible to broader groups? We have a real range of organisations in Make Space Oxford, about 40 in our hub space in North Oxford at the moment, but it really is lacking in diversity, and that's partly it reflects the local community in Oxford, but it's also us having to recognise that there are structural and institutional components around how that space is built, which are meaning that we're not inviting to people. And so it's not just about inviting people in. It's about going out and meeting people where they are in their communities. And what we're trying to do much more of now is saying, what are you doing? What kind of creative practices are already thriving and underway? And what spaces do you need to fulfill those? And so we've recently secured some funding to work in some of the estates around Oxford, in Barton, Blackbird Leys and Rose Hill, trying to understand how we can unlock some of the empty spaces there in those communities and actually be a conduit for funding and for resourcing and support to just say, look, you're already doing it. All you need is some more resources, some more support to perhaps move along that journey. And we're at the very beginning of that sort of transition away from inviting people in to actually going out and meet people where they are. But I think that's some of the sort of early steps that we need to take alongside being better listeners, as you say, Lucinda.
Really interesting. And I'm just a stat I'll throw in, and Richard, I'll get your thoughts on this. So we're talking about what is the root of the problem. According to the ONS, they say that it's about 26% of Oxfordshire primary school pupils are from ethnically diverse backgrounds, which that's 1 in 4 at primary school. And that obviously isn't the representation we're seeing in creative industries. Richard, your thoughts?
In terms of my work, I'm currently, I would say, working with a group of people with learning disabilities. I don't like to speak for them. I'd rather they speak for themselves. But it doesn't always fit. There's not always the forum for that. And I think I agree that outreach is often the best way forward for that. You need to go out into the community and meet other people and just try and get sort of as many diverse voices as possible. It's particularly challenging with people with learning disabilities because they just would not. Many cannot cope with the institutional culture. I think that was mentioned by somebody else. The culture is comes through school into university into into business, and often people with learning disabilities cannot cope with those kind of institutions. I'll give you one example. Often people with Asperger's, for instance, may be able to be a fantastic worker, but they're going to feel very uncomfortable maybe making eye contact with you. And in a culture, in a university culture or in a worker culture, that may be kind of a requirement. Or something with dyslexia, for instance, a sort of big focus on getting word perfect on everything in terms of written work. But you're losing those diverse voices if you focus on these particular sort of cultural aspects. Yeah,
really thoughtful answer. Thank you. Natasha and Tasha, it's great having so many panelists with almost the same names, Lucinda and Lucy here as well. But Natasha and Tasha, given Oxford and Oxfordshire's rich heritage, coupled with a number of diverse communities we have locally, are we in fact a city and a county that can genuinely be one of the most diverse creative and cultural locations anywhere in the world? Natasha first.
I think Oxford's an amazing place and has so much to offer. I don't see any reason why it couldn't push itself to the forefront of being such a diverse place. I do think there are also a number of exciting programs. Things are moving on and changing from the way they were, and there's a lot of programs being run to really offer a step up and an opportunity for people to get more involved.
Tasha, you've got some thoughts on this?
Sure. I'd just like to echo what Natasha said. I do think Oxford and Oxfordshire have the potential to become one of the most diverse counties in the world, but there is a lot we have to do to get there. And I think, as many people on the panel have already touched on, having those conversations, beginning outreach, making sure the work we're doing is accessible to various underrepresented communities is important for us to get to that point, to becoming number one in the world.
Yeah. And Lucinda, perhaps your thoughts on this. I mean, it's not just ethnicity that's an issue here. You've touched on this already across the panel. Social class is still a major problem. Richard, you've talked about disability as well. White working class kids are one of the most disadvantaged groups in education. How well are they represented in the creative sector from what you've seen? Lucy first.
Well, going from sort of diversity statistics, specifically sort of in the not-for-profit bit of the sector, which is where I sit mainly in sort of museums and galleries, they're not represented. And there are some really fantastic grassroots activist groups that have sprung up. So there's one called Museums as Muck, which is a group of museum professionals who come from very working class backgrounds, who are very proud of that and who are sort of telling the sector where it's going wrong. I mean, I would say I do always feel slightly uncomfortable when we talk about how, you know, Oxford and Oxfordshire, it should be the best in the world. I find that language sometimes can actually put people off, and it's not sort of really inclusive. Yeah, we are a fantastic city, we're a fantastic county, we've got 2 brilliant universities, we've got some amazing countryside, you know, we've got some of the best university museum collections in the world, but there are lots of other places that are doing really exciting stuff too. And I think we should be really looking outside of Oxfordshire and thinking, you know, who else is doing this really well? So Greater Manchester, for example, they're doing a hell of a lot in terms of their culture and creative sector to break down some of those socioeconomic stereotypes that we've just been talking about.
Lucinda.
Yes, I think I'm just going back to the Oxford point. I was really interested, Dr. Yellen, who I can see is at the top of my Zoom bar, the research on girls and leadership, where I think your one of your points was that girls saw Oxford as a place where leaders come from. I think, if I haven't paraphrased that too badly. And I think that's interesting, because I think actually let's have our homegrown leaders. Let's bring in our homegrown leaders. Let's cultivate and encourage and mentor. I'm very fortunate, I feel often, because I work in children's television and children's media, and I find them the most incredible audience to work with because of the openness and the willingness to believe in themselves and to talk about what some of the issues are when they might not want to believe in themselves. And so I think that education is absolutely key, but I don't think it just stops with young people. I think your education continues through life, and those opportunities really to learn. And I'm not simply talking about pieces of paper that tell you that you've been to a higher education institution. I think it's much more about learning about other people, openness. I'm intrigued to go to the pedagogy session, which is coming up, I think, next week, which is really interesting, a new term for me. So just that, yes, education in its broadest sense, if that answers your question, Howard.
I think it does very well, actually. And I just want to say thank you very much for the questions that you've been posting in the chat facility for our panel, to everybody watching at the moment. Thanks. We really do want to make this as interactive as we possibly can. So thank you for watching online. We've got a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the broadcast, and there we'll endeavour to answer as many of your questions as we can. If you're raising points that do require a little more detail, one of the OxLEP team will be back in touch to follow it up with you. And if you're watching this as a recording, then there's always help on hand at oxfordshirelep.com. First, though, more from our panel before we get to our Q&A section. Let's look at how things can and should change. Jasmine, perhaps you could offer the first answer to this. Andy and Natasha, if you would contribute too. How can our hardest to reach communities progress their creativity to the next level, potentially commercialising their ideas too? Jasmine.
Oh, crikey. Big question. I mean, what I will do first of all, Andy has used a couple of phrases that I would love to pick up with. So one thing he said was talking about pathways. I think pathways is so key for this conversation. So what I certainly notice in publishing is there's lots and lots of sort of competitions and schemes about discovering underrepresented voices, which is fantastic. But what happens after that? You know, you run a competition, maybe one person wins it. What about everyone else? I think there needs to be better pathways for people from underrepresented backgrounds. And I'm going to say it, paid pathways. So you learn by doing, okay? So kind of more apprenticeships. I feel like in other industries that works really well, but in the creative industry, I'd love to see more apprenticeships where young people, in fact, actually not just young people, people have the opportunity to maybe move away from a career which isn't in the creative industries, and there is some financial support, and that you're doing the work. So you're learning and you're sort of building up that sort of creative muscle. I think that would really help. And then there was something else that Andy was saying around access to resources and grants. So even from my point of view, I sort of started as a children's author, and I've recently launched my own production company. part of what allowed myself to give myself permission to do that was receiving a grant from the Arts Council, one called the Developing Your Creative Practice, and it was £10,000. And it was enough to sort of de-risk the whole idea of setting up my own endeavour. You know, I think there's something about the industry sort of holding out its hands and saying, okay, you've got great ideas. You don't necessarily have the safety nets that other people in the industry have. You know, if you come from a middle class background, if it doesn't work out for you working in film and TV or in publishing, there's a kind of safety net. If you don't have that, then of course you're going to stick with the role where you know you're definitely going to get paid. So there's something around the actual structures of working in the creative industry that I think is really important, those sort of financial structures.
Andy, lend us your thoughts.
Yeah, there's so much great stuff in there, and it's quite hard to try and synthesize and pack in all the different elements that you could respond to on this. I think Jasmine's spot on. You know, funding is crucial. Being able to have financial resources. We've talked about heard about paid internships, grant funding. I was speaking to a range of groups who've recently applied to Space through the Meanwhile in Oxfordshire programme that Make Space is currently working on. They were a range of different Black and ethnic minority groups, and they'd all been refused funding, and they couldn't understand why. They'd all been invited to apply for funding and been refused. So again, we've got some structural issues there about grant funding. Accessing money is a total game, a game of language, a game of technique. And you can learn that. Unfortunately, you have to learn that to be able to tap into it. I'd love us to move to a place where there isn't that requirement for more diverse communities to have to bend and contort themselves to be able to access money. But whilst we're still in this transition phase, there needs to be that bridge built so that that can more easily be accessed, that financial resource. Jasmine's talked about support, and that can come in so many different forms. A lot of it for us is around just the provision of space. And that's both physical, but it's also psychological headspace. It's often thought of as a great privilege to be able to have the time to think, to create, to produce whatever it is from artwork to music, to any kind of creative medium. And that shouldn't be thought of as a luxury. That should be accessible to a lot more of us. And so that speaks right back into the structural issues around the cost of living in Oxford and Oxfordshire, the cost of our housing, the cost of being able to hire space in order to do that, the campaigns that are going on around the living wage, the real living wage, and actually being able to raise up the kind of standards there. And then the final bit is, for me, is around dislocation and disconnection. I think, you know, creativity, and I think you might come to this a bit later, so much of that is about, it's a collaborative exercise for us. It's about different minds meeting together, sparking off one another and developing further creative practice. And at the moment, we're very dislocated, of course, more so through COVID, but also through our lack of access to space and the marginalisation of the creative industries as a whole. And so the more that we can build these opportunities for reconnecting with one another, the more that I think we can build our collective confidence of working together across a diverse range of groups and start to move forward in these with these tricky questions.
Natasha, would you like to contribute to that? How can the hardest reached communities progress to that next level?
Yeah, I think what everyone says made so much sense, and I totally agree. And I think that, you know, the red tape around a lot of schemes that make them really hard to access, like loosening that is super key, so that people, you know, a lot of these schemes actually get really underused when they actually come out. But I think the other thing that, you know, we've seen really helpful is like building strong networks between communities, so they actually like support each other in taking advantage of things and actually shortcutting, you know, how to get things done easier by someone else that's done it before you, that you can ask a question to, and, you know, shortcut all that learning of like having to read through and work it out yourself.
Great stuff. Tasha, Richard, how important is it for our creative entrepreneurs from all communities to collaborate? Tasha, this is obviously what you do day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really, really important for so many reasons, of course, to collaborate with different people, different communities, different industries, to get a sense of how we can all work together towards a common goal. And as you said, it is a main focus of my role, and something I think is really important for for us to do as, as a university and as researchers, but also for the creative industries, and I know Jasmine and Andy had touched on this before, but again, access into the creative industries from my own experience, specifically in film and TV, you often find that it's quite difficult to break into this industry. And I think through collaboration, a lot of people can get more access into the creative industries and build those connections and be able to work with these companies and partners they might not have had access to before, which is really important.
Richard, collaboration is key then. You're on mute, sir.
Apologies. Very bad at this.
So, we'll have to redub you silent film Oxford.
Yes. So I completely agree. The co-creation, co-producing, working together, getting professionals, perhaps with disabilities, without disabilities, to work together, or from other different backgrounds, is absolutely key. And another thing I wanted to pick up there, I think what Lucinda said, I think adult education is absolutely key. It's been decimated over the years. It's had its funding cut. So I was quite pleased to hear that there's something in the Queen's speech about it this time, maybe more money going in, but we'll have to see what the detail is on that. But it gives people from poor backgrounds, from working class backgrounds, from all sorts of backgrounds, an opportunity to learn skills while they perhaps keep their day job. And I think people forget that. And that's actually one of the key ethos of Film Oxford, that we run a programme of filmmaking workshops and courses for people who want to do that in the evenings, do that at weekends, and build up a portfolio so they can go and get work that route rather than the university route, which obviously suits many people but doesn't suit everyone.
Great stuff. Lucinda and Lucy, what constraints did the COVID-19 pandemic pose to aspiring creatives, or actually has greater reliance and use of digital technologies and social media platforms actually created more opportunities? Lucy?
Sorry. Yeah, I think there are lots of positives, ironically, that have come out of COVID-19, and particularly in terms of the hideous phrase that we're all using, the digital pivot. I think it's meant that we've all had to scale up much faster than perhaps we had been thinking previously. I mean, I know just from my own business, Cultural Associates Oxford perspective, but also from GLAM, the Gardens, Libraries and Museums, those were skills that we've wanted to be developing for a long time. We've wanted to put more stuff online and just haven't, because the impetus hasn't been there. And it's that sort of hackneyed old phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. It's meant that we've all had to get on with it. I do think that for individual artists and creatives, though, I think that's been much, much more challenging, because not everybody has been able to sort of access sort of the grants that have been available for relief through COVID. And it's raised all kinds of other issues as well, in terms of a lot of creative practitioners who work perhaps with those more diverse community groups. We've not been able to go in and do that work with them. And you can do so much online, and you can do some really great stuff online, but there's an awful lot that you can't do. So there's been pluses and minuses. And I think now, as we're sort of moving out of COVID, it's working out, what are the things that we want to keep building on? And actually, what are the things that we just want to desperately get back and do? And so, for example, the museums in Oxford have all opened today. So that's great.
Good news. Lovely that we can share that today. Thank you. Lucinda, your thoughts on that point?
Yes, I think it is absolutely, as Lucy says, about continuing to explore and leverage the opportunities that it's given us. And I really would not want to lose any of those. And we're really keen to continue to explore those. I think it very much does depend on the individual as to how they may have benefited or felt that they've lost from it. Interestingly, just referring back to a couple of sessions that at this conference, the one, Aaron Williamson, who is deaf, said that actually it's been difficult for him. Arti Shah has said that she had so many more opportunities to communicate with people and to run masterclasses and her mentoring classes and to reach so many more people. So I think that is very much a question for the individual. But I would hate to see online being just dismissed as, oh, well, that's just where you go to get your YouTube. YouTube itself, incredibly leveling and a great opportunity to learn from each other. And I think the other thing to remember about online is there are many, many communities online, and we can't all be at every single meeting. It's not like there's one great big meeting of everybody who goes online culturally. We're all in different spaces online as well. So it's a question of finding out where you feel comfortable and how you can grow and develop.
From the digital to the physical, Andy and Natasha, how can we repurpose our ever-changing high streets to support and enable our many creatives? Natasha?
Yeah, so I guess that, you know, the key thing with the high streets that I think obviously lots of them are kind of looking to be sort of repurposed into like more mixed use schemes to like increase footfall in general areas. But I think one thing that can really help in the short term is allowing like entrepreneurs to pop up, to create pop-ups and to give them the actual infrastructure to do that cost effectively. You know, to start up a restaurant, you need all of the different like cooking equipment, but as that stuff's in a lot of places already, I think one thing that could be really useful in the short term is to help our high streets is to enable entrepreneurs to kind of take short-term things which they can get up and running relatively easily, and to support them in doing that.
Brilliant. Andy?
Yeah, well, we're very privileged to be supporting a council's scheme at the moment called Meanwhile in Oxfordshire, which I mentioned previously, which is some funding come through the COVID Recovery Task Force to do just what Natasha's talking about. So Make Space is all about meanwhile space, and that means the temporary use of vacant or underused space. And at no time in kind of recent history has that been a more acute problem. And we see that as an opportunity because we have this incredible plethora of creative groups and organisations and individuals across the county desperately looking to respond to the recent hardships that they've experienced and to find a place to do that. And so we're working with about 7 other different organisations to bring up to 50 currently empty buildings across the county back into use. We've had over 200 applications for space in the last couple of months, and we'll be working with landlords to try and broker those spaces on a short-term period. That could be anything from 6 weeks to 6 years, hopefully at reduced cost, and then be able to make them accessible to organisations on little or no rental cost basis, in the hope that we can start to breathe life and creativity back into the high streets, just as you suggest, Howard.
We're going to have our Q&A in the next few moments, but I'd like to get, if you like, a final word from each of you on the actual topic of why we're here, if you like, to sum up the presentation. We focused on what is a creative and diverse county. So I'm going to get each of you to give us your version of what that looks like and what needs to be done to achieve that. If we can keep your answers to maximum a minute, I won't put the clock on you, but and then we'll go to the audience questions, because there have been a lot, and thank you for sending those in. So I'll put you in this order. Lucinda, if you would go first, your version then of what is a creative and diverse county.
Oh my goodness. I might just sit and think about that for a minute, if I may. I'll tell you all later. What is a creative and diverse county? I think it's the conversation we're having here. I think it's all the conversations that are taking place. I think it's a county that has pride in itself because it's diverse and because it offers opportunities to people. So for me, that's addressing the digital divide. It's thinking about how people can come together. It's positively discriminating with local artists, for example, artist residencies. If you can't make it a local Oxford person, have a local Oxford person alongside the person that you're bringing in from elsewhere, and really make people feel as though it's of value to belong to Oxfordshire.
Fantastic. Richard, your thoughts on what is a creative and diverse county? What does it look like?
I think it's more. We feel. We feel very good when we're surrounded by people who are like us, but because that's a kind of a built-in bias within our sort of psychology. So we need to kind of understand that. We need to understand ourselves, I think, more better is what I'm trying to say, and understand why we don't want to communicate with other people on a biological basis. but then overcome that and work, get used to being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and being perhaps in a room with someone who's got perhaps a learning disability, or someone from a cultural background that's very different from yours. And I think when we start to focus on ourselves a little bit and our own internal biases, we can start to overcome those kind of problems. So I think learning throughout your life and learning about other people is really, really important. And you learn so much from it. And I think it helps you to grow and change those institutions and organisations sort of around you.
Fabulous sentiments, Richard. Andy, your thoughts on what is a creative and diverse county? Give us your impression of that.
Yeah, well, I might go back to you kind of introduced at the beginning, kind of mission statement behind Make Space, which is all about this revival and repurposing and transforming of empty and underused space, and making it accessible on an affordable basis, to create community-driven workspaces, work hubs, nurturing connection and support for social enterprises, creatives, makers and doers who are all committed to positive social and environmental change.
Brilliant. Tasha, your thoughts on what is a creative and diverse county?
Sure. So I echo what everyone said so far, and what Lucinda said about the conversation we're having now. I think having an open, honest conversation of what we can do to make sure we're a county that is more diverse and inclusive, and incorporating various groups from across the community to have these conversations is important. And I also think, as many other people have mentioned before, being a city and a county that can offer support and promote collaboration and offer opportunities that could be inclusive and accessible to communities across the board.
Thank you for that. Jasmine, share your vision on a creative and diverse county.
I think it was sort of revolve around two things, which is sort of local knowledge and nuance. So I used to live in Witney, which is West Oxfordshire, and actually what you have in Witney is a very interesting combination of like the well-heeled and maybe parts where people don't really get out of Witney, right? That's their whole world, but it doesn't mean they haven't got stories to tell. So using local knowledge and understanding that diversity and inclusion is a nuanced thing. So you're going to need different strategies in different places. So if you take Oxford, which is like this international seat of learning, like how exciting it is that you can sort of draw on that sort of international vibe. That's very different from Blackbird Leys and the sort of stories that are there. So I think local knowledge and nuance is what we need to really be a diverse county.
Natasha, give us your thoughts on a creative and diverse county.
I hear so many great points made already. I guess I would describe it as everyone, like no matter their background, having like a wide variety of opportunities they feel that they can participate in.
Short and to the point. Thank you. Lucy, finally, your thoughts on what is a creative and diverse county. You can paint the picture.
Well, what they all said, obviously, they said it much better than me. But for me, it's a county where anyone can have as big or as small an idea as they want, but it's an idea that they can progress through sort of clear and transparent pathways, and just to be able to explore their own creativity.
Yeah, it was always going to be difficult going last behind six very creative folk. Apologies for that. Let's welcome OxLEP's Communications Manager, Rob Panting, very creative himself. He's been fielding the many questions you've been posting for our excellent panel during the presentation. Rob, what sort of things are people asking?
Thanks, Howard. And just to follow up from Jasmine's description of Witney, as a Witney resident, I fully subscribe to that. It is very, very true.
We're not sure whether Rob's in the well-heeled department or not.
No, we'll probably leave that there. Absolutely. Thank you to everyone for your contributions in the chat bar. It's much appreciated. There's a couple of pre-registered questions as well that I'll cover off. I guess the first category to tap into looks into entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, I guess, working within the creative industry. And it's something that Jasmine touched on, I think Natasha did too, around access to, I guess, finance and support and the application process behind that. It was a question in the chat bar. So could more be done to help and support aspiring creatives and entrepreneurs to write successful applications. It's not a particularly straightforward process in many ways. Jasmine, can I throw that one across to you? You mentioned some of your experience in starting your own companies and projects.
I'm glad you asked me, actually, because I feel like I went on a bit of a journey. So my background is as a children's author, which I didn't really think of as a business. You know, it's like, I'm a creative, I'm just going to create stories and, you know, not actually thinking about how you can make a living. But it was this transition into becoming a producer that really sort of plugged me into the Oxfordshire network of how you build a business and a social enterprise. So I realized that what I do as a producer has got this social purpose. And all of a sudden there was access to all of this mentorship and information and a business plan and what your goal setting is. And actually, I think just because you are a creative, it doesn't mean that you can't overlay some of, you know, throwing a business canvas in there. It's really helpful. It's really helpful. It kind of sort of holding you and allows you to be more creative, because if you can't make a living, you can't carry on doing the thing that you love, really. So I think it's that connection of business and creativity which is going to give you longevity.
Absolutely, thank you. And I guess as a follow on to that, so this question's come from my boss, Nigel Tipple, who's joined us today. And I guess if I throw this to Lucinda and possibly Richard as well, to what extent does the panel consider that the creative sector recognises themselves as businesses? I think it's following on from what Jasmine's just said, and should access to how can we access, or how can those businesses or potential businesses access the support that they need? Lucinda, I guess you've had sort of experience of needing to access support and specific financial support in growing your business. Again, I guess really following on from Jasmine's point.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting question, because depending on, it's such a variety. The creative industries covers such a wide range of skills and businesses and niche businesses, and so I think it's very hard to have one size fits all. But I think openness and accessibility, and I'm so pleased actually, Jasmine, that you've mentioned OxLEP and Grant in particular, because I haven't necessarily had to talk to him about business support, but the conversations we have are always enriching in terms of guidance and who to talk to. He is a person with a wealth of knowledge, and Rosie too. So sometimes from surprising places, I might not think that as a well-established business in a very national and international arena predominantly, that I would necessarily need that. So, but I think we do all tend in our own divisions, these categories of what is creative, tend to often sit in our own silos and perhaps not acknowledge that we have these experiences. I mean, I would probably talk to Jasmine, but I might not talk to Lucy, because I might feel actually that what Lucy's doing is very different to what we're doing. But actually, I think in a lot of cases, they're probably similar. And we're talking about some of the same audiences, some of the same challenges. So being able to have that real willingness to share experiences and to give advice and take advice and understand each other's challenges, really important, I think, and a forum to do that.
Excellent. Thanks, Lucinda. Richard, I guess I'll slightly adapt that question in terms of opportunities. And given that you work with people with learning disabilities, how important is it for creatives to collaborate, to open up opportunities to those communities that perhaps haven't had those opportunities before? I think I'm going to have to tell you you're on mute again, Richard.
Sorry, go on.
No problem.
I had a little coughing fit, so I had to turn it off. I think it's really, really important. I mean, one example is we've had a long-standing relationship with Modern Art Oxford, which is, one of the top modern art galleries in the UK with international reputation, and they've been incredibly supportive to the group and to Film Oxford and to other communities that we work with. And that started off as a very small conversation with one member of staff, and has become, sort of a regular thing. And I think being their attitude of saying, well, anyone who comes who can produce work of professional quality, we can exhibit it in a professional way and bring audiences into that, and welcoming other people in. So I think that kind of partnership is what we need more of. We need organisations working together and really starting to understand each other over sort of long term, because it's very hard to get started on it. But once you're down that pathway, Andy mentioned, that it becomes easier and stronger.
Excellent, thanks, Richard. I'm very conscious of time, but I'll throw one further question in. Maybe if I send this to Tasha and Lucy, just some sort of wider commentary really in recent weeks. Some of the recent views on diversity, particularly around the Golden Globes, Oscars, BAFTAs. Quite a lot of discussion around actually how those awards can perhaps reflect a far more diverse creative sector. Do you think that those developments in recent weeks can open up the sector more widely, or to much wider communities as well? Tasha, if I start with your thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, I do hope so. I mean, this is one thing that's sort of come up in recent weeks that will hopefully push the creative industries to be more inclusive and accessible to various underrepresented groups. And as I mentioned before, I think it is really important for the creative industries and those individual companies themselves to make the effort to access new talent and underrepresented groups through different programs, through various different companies and pathways as well. Because as I mentioned before, from my own experience, it is an incredibly difficult industry to break into if you don't know people. Again, from my experience, I'm sure others might have other views on this, but I think there is a lot the creative industries can do themselves to make sure that they access these underrepresented communities and include them as part of their talent pool.
Excellent. Lucy, I've teed you up, so I'll let you have the final word on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important that actually it is a national conversation, and it's one that's being had across social media and different platforms as a profile raising exercise to demonstrate that actually it's not okay that in the 21st century this has still been going on. I mean, it's sort of fairly unbelievable, and I think it sort of shines the spotlight across the whole of the creative industries, and I hope it's a conversation that keeps going. And sort of kudos to Brooks for having this panel discussion. It's absolutely this should be what we're talking about all the time across all our sectors within the creative industries all of the time. It shouldn't be a separate siloed thing. It should be about our daily thinking and part of our core work.
That's a great point to finish on. Thank you. That's about it for this OxLEP presentation at the Oxford Brookes University Creative Industries Festival 2021. Thank you for all the questions that you've been posting, and thanks to Rob Panting for putting them to our brilliant panel: Lucinda Whiteley, Lucy Shaw, Tasha Patel, Andy Edwards, Jasmine Richards, Richard Durier, and Natasha Guerra. Hopefully the last hour of insights and debate has truly inspired you. Oxfordshire has a rich cultural and creative sector which can only be made richer by opening up to everyone and making inclusion and diversity something that is a given. We are a wonderfully creative land with a strong tradition of adapting to change and reflecting who we are as a society. We must all engage in making sure no one is left behind and the playing field is levelled for everyone. In turn, this will strengthen and ensure a diverse and economically stable creative industry sector in Oxfordshire for the years to come. And as ever, OxLEP is there to support our creative industries in the county. Do find a few minutes to check out the range of help available to creative and cultural businesses at oxlepbusiness.co.uk. Do enjoy what else the Oxford Brookes University Creative Industries Festival 2021 has to offer this month, which runs until Thursday, the 27th of May. But for now, from me, Howard Bentham, thank you and goodbye.